Excellent. Good evening, everyone. Hugs and stitches to all of you. This is Steps of Digitizing. You know, let me preface by saying, in putting my outline together for tonight, I work on this stuff a little earlier. Had a nice little outline put together. I came into the office. DJ is sitting here next to me, and he says, "Oh, I've got that outline already done." So you know what? I really just want to give it a plug because it really is quite amazing. But I'm virtually using the outline from DJ's book, Digitizing Steps for Success. I know that many of you own my book, Destined to Digitize. Digitizing Steps for Success by DJ Anderson can be purchased at any of your local dealers. It is an amazing book. It's certainly based upon my measurement theory for embroidery creation, but DJ's done a fabulous job, and it is software specific, and that's really the main differential between my book and DJ's book. It's amazing. Literally, I'm using basically what's on page 10 for those of you who have the book, and I want to take you through the steps of digitizing. Now, we've been doing webinars for quite a while, and so I'm going to get a little more detailed. I'm certainly going to discuss some items that we've discussed in the past, but I want to try to take you all a little deeper into the digitizing process. So, number one, where we're going to get started is the first step in digitizing, folks, is certainly acquiring your artwork. Now, Floriani software certainly works with all your backdrops files, JPEGs, bitmaps, TIFFs, and such. If you're loading images that are backdrop files, again, JPEGs and bitmaps for the most part, you can go under File and Load Backdrops. We also do have the little icon right here on the left, the backdrop tool. You can click on that. Up will come your JPEGs, bitmaps, and such. The diamond, I've already brought it in, but I could click on the diamond, just hit open, and that would come in. But our software also supports, and I know most of you know this, but it also supports vector-based art. Vector-based art is artwork created on a graphic software. The differential being when you bring in vector-based art, it's File and Import Artwork. When you click on the Import Artwork, anything that is indeed a vector-based piece of art can come in. So again, two ways to bring in your artwork: load backdrop or import artwork. Now, once you have the graphic on the screen, the most important element to digitizing is always what I simply call finish size. The first element to creating an embroidery design is you bring in your graphic and you change it into the finished size. Now, while I work metrically, and many of you who've listened to my webinars know that I work metrically, and there's reasons, I don't size metrically, I always size in inches. So I just come in here and I toggle over to inches. I make sure I'm on inches. Now, in the backdrop panel up in my properties box, you'll see the size that it is. This artwork currently is 9.68 inches, so let's make it 4 inches wide, or let's just come here, it's 10.42, let's say 4 inches tall. Click apply, and now your size. But you know what? I actually want to discuss something at this point, because are we really 4 inches in size? Look, in your last update, and you know what, this took me a little while. I was digitizing. I work with a lot of backdrop files, JPEGs and such. I would bring in my artwork, I would digitize the design, I'd size it, I'd digitize the design, but then when I ran it, it always seemed to run a little smaller than the size that I was telling it to be. Make something 4 inches and it's coming out like 3 7/8 inches and such. And really, I thought initially that the software had some kind of an issue. Folks, it wasn't the software, it was me. I digitize on a white screen. It's just pleasant to my eyes. I can see it the best. But I'm going to go ahead and change the screen to gray. And you see what you're seeing? You're actually seeing the white piece of paper that this was scanned in on, or the image that we downloaded from the website. When you scan something in, or you bring it in from a load backdrop, it sees that white background. That's because I always digitize on a white background. I never really realized that. So in actuality, if I said this is 4 inches, if I come in and measure it, you'll see that this thing is about 3.8 or so, okay? What it measures and what's right at 4 inches is that white background, okay? And it's right on 4 inches. In the last update that you've got, okay? And I'll go ahead and just, yep, and I'll bring this in just 1 second in the load backdrop, and let's just go ahead and I'll show you when I bring this in. You can now right click and you see how it says define the scale. Just click on define scale. come to the bottom of your piece of art and just come up to the top of it. When you release, it'll ask you the size. You say, I want you to be 4 inches tall. Click OK. Now the actual design, not that background piece of paper, is exactly 4 inches tall. I think that's a really wonderful element to the process. Okay, so I sized the design. Now, once the design is sized, and the reason why you always have to set that finished size that you want to put it on the garment is because only when you're working on the finished size of the embroidery design will you be able to determine the proper stitch type to use, okay? With determined stitch type, okay? And it's so easy to do within Floriani software because in order to determine stitch type, all you need to do at this point in time is grab your ruler, just come into the area that you want to create and measure. I'm sorry, I've got a cord going under my mouse pad. I just bumped over it. Just 1 second. I'm going to move these cords out of the way. I just come in here. I left click and hold it after I grab my ruler. Measure across it. You see how that says it's 23 millimeters wide? Use a fill stitch. Come into this area. I'm going to measure across it. I'm going to use a fill stitch. Now, let me just explain something too. And look, this is one of the major issues with utilizing auto-digitizing. That's why when we develop the segmented auto-digitizing, what you're witnessing right now, because I came in and measured this element, fill stitch, this element, fill stitch. If I measured this element, fill stitch. Come in and measure this area here, fill stitch. Come in and measure this area, it's going to say a satin stitch. Well, in a design like this, I want to retain the continuity of the embroidery design, of the stitch type within each element, meaning if this is a fill, this is a fill, this is a fill, and this is a fill, even though this measures a satin stitch, I don't want that to be a satin stitch. I want that to be a fill stitch. A satin stitch looks different than a fill stitch when laid because it's an elongated stitch. It tends to puff up. I don't want it to look like it looked just totally different. I want to maintain the integrity. So if I measure elements and 4 out of 5 here are telling me it's a fill stitch, you want to do that blue in a fill stitch. Now, that has always been the issue with utilizing auto-digitizing. When you take a design in and you just convert the entire design, it also determines stitch type based on width. So if it were to convert this into stitches, it would do a fill, a fill, a fill, a fill, and over here it would do a satin, okay? It's not going to look correct. You always want to maintain the integrity of a stitch type, in this case because it's a diamond structure of that entire element. I want those all to be fill stitches. So I'm going to do all those blue in fill stitches. Then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to measure, and again, fill stitch. Fill stitch, well, it's telling me satin there, but again, the same thing. I want fills in all of this also because this other color, blue, is fills. I want that entire background in fills. So while that tool is so helpful in telling you exactly what stitch type to use, look, for every rule, there is an exception to the rule of embroidery. In order to retain the integrity of this entire design, I want all this background area to be in fill stitches. So while it's amazingly helpful, and the black certainly is going to be satin stitches. While it's incredibly helpful, again, just always remember, for every rule, there's an exception to the rule. And maintaining the integrity of a design, many times we're going to break that rule a little bit. Even though it's telling me a satin, I'm going to do that area in a fill stitch, okay? So you simply measure to determine stitch types, all right? Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is formulating your blueprint. You know what? I'm going to bring up an existing design that I have. Now, when I say formulate your blueprint, is many times you look at a design and go, you know what do I do first? What do I do second? What areas do I digitize and to create? Because look, an image is a graphic. But the most amazing thing, or one of the captivating things always for me about embroidery, is that in embroidery you can create dimension, okay? So while it's a graphic, you can add an amazing dimension to your embroidery designs. Now, the way that dimensional embroidery works is like this, and I'll say it a couple of times. In embroidery, the stitch type creates the effect. The stitch direction creates the dimension. So we're going to talk about two things. Number one, we're going to talk about what order would I digitize a design like this in, and secondarily, how can I make this design look incredibly dimensional? And then I'll take it another level for you with one of the other designs. First of all, when I look at a design like this, okay, the first thing that I see, and I guess the easiest way to put it, is I always look from my background forward. Meaning, what do I perceive in that embroidery design as the farthest element away? Because many times the farthest element away is what I'm going to digitize first. So the first thing that I see in this embroidery design, what looks the farthest away to me, is the sky, this blue right here. It's the first thing that I'm going to create. What do I see then above the blue but behind everything else? I see these sun rays. I see the yellow sun rays coming up. I'm going to digitize that next. What do I see then? I see the mountains. I want the mountains on top of the sky. I want the mountains in front of the rays. The sun is going down. I want to see those in front of the rays. So third, I see the mountains. I then see the snow-capped peaks. To me then, I then see the border. I then see the stems on the flowers. I then see the leaves of the flowers. I then see the flower. So I think about things dimensionally. I look what is the farthest away to me, or illusionally. I look at what I perceive as the farthest away, and then I work my way forward. And many times that's the way you build a blueprint. Look at, again, if you see, let's say we're doing a duck, I see maybe the body of the duck or the chicken, whatever it may be, and I might see that wing on top of it. I'm going to layer it in that direction. Now, stitch type creates the effect. So the illusion of the sky, I'm going to lay a fill stitch. The illusion of the rays, I'm going to lay a running stitch. To create the mountains, I want them to stick up a little bolder. I'm going to use satin stitching, but I tend to use what I call an interlocking satin stitch. That means I'm putting satin stitches on top of each other at irregular lengths. You do have that as an option in your satin stitching. I then see the leaves. I also use satin stitching in those, again, with interlocking satin stitches. I then see the flowers also with satins. The satin stitches tend to be raised, so they raise up higher. The fills tend to lay down flatter, so they'll lay down flatter. You know what? I'll go ahead and turn it into 3D. And look, even in 3D mode, just on a screen, you can see the dimension. You can see that that sky is behind that, and I went straight left to right, okay? The stitch type creates the effect. The direction creates the dimension. I went simply left to right. It looks farthest back. I then used random running stitching, running in opposite or different directions to create the sun rays. And then you can see here the satin stitching, which gives a raise on top of that background. Okay, and again, they're done with interlocking satin stitches with a regular jagged edge, and that's what it is. It's your jagged edge satin stitching under your controls in the property box. I also did the snow-capped peaks. Now, I wanted the snow-capped peaks to appear like doves flying towards heaven, per se, in this design. So I digitized them like wings. I used elongated, again, satin stitches to create the effect. If you then notice, when I came in here into the leaves, I again used satin stitches, but now look at what we did. I went every direction the leaf is going, and basically I saw the point here, saw the end here. That's the direction I took the stitch. So I took the stitch in every leaf in the direction that I perceived it out towards the point. Creates amazing dimension. I did the same thing with the flower petals. Every one of the flower petals went a different direction. And that is really the trick to dimensional embroidery. Now, here's a trick that my son taught me many, many years ago when I was writing my book. I was writing a chapter on dimensional embroidery, and I've always said stitch type creates the effect, stitch direction creates the dimension. But when you talk about the dimensional aspects, which is what direction my stitches go, I was looking for terminology that would simplify it. And my son said to me, my son Kelly said to me at one point, he said, "Dad, it's just like coloring with pencils." And you know what, folks? It's a very simple trick. You have a piece of artwork, okay? You can bring it in, you can measure to determine stitch type, but what direction do the stitches go? Here's my suggestion. Print your artwork out on as big a piece of paper as you possibly can. Get yourself a good set of colored pencils and draw your artwork. You know what you're going to find? 99% of the time, the direction your pencil is going is the direction you should take your stitches, okay? It is just like coloring. Do you all recall when we had coloring books as kids and you turn them these different directions? Such a simple trick, but it really is quite amazing. You'll be amazed. And again, embroidery has such a dimensional aspect to it. Stitch type creates effect. Stitch direction creates dimension. All right, let's go ahead and talk about digitizing designs. But you know what, Kath, do we have any initial questions? I'm moving through pretty good, but I've still got a lot to do. But if we have time, or if there are a couple of questions, I don't mind answering it right now. Can you hear me, Miss Kathy? If you can't hear me, then I'm just going to go ahead and proceed with the lesson. All right. Look, folks, digitizing within the software, and when we come out and demo and we do what we do at the classes, we normally show you what I simply call the segmented auto-digitizing. And again, what separates this from auto-digitizing is you get to do a piece at a time. So this is a bitmap or a JPEG. So what I'm going to do in this case, yes. Okay, well, you know what, Kath, if there's a couple questions, because I got kind of a long spell now that'll take most of the time. If we have a couple of questions, now would be the time to do it. I'm feeling on tonight, Miss Kathy. All right. Look, we'll go ahead and continue. As I teach, and I know that most of the educators do when we're teaching you or showing you the software, we show you what we call the segmented auto-digitizing, which for me, when I can use it, I always use it. I'm going to take you a little deeper than that, but I want to show you it one time here, and then I'm going to elevate it a little bit for you. Now, I want all the blue areas to be fill stitch. Again, once I've measured, determined stitch type, digitizing to some extent is nothing more than picking your stitch type, selecting your magic wand up here on the top, coming down here to the bottom to the color bar, right-clicking on the color. Digitizing truly is this simple. Left-click, right-click, that's done. Left and right, 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 that's done. I've retained the integrity. Now, though, let's take it a step further, okay? Because what I want to add to this design, I've used a fill stitch and all of that, but I want to add some dimension to what I just did. What can I do? Look, very, very simple. The structures in many cases for me determine the direction of my stitch. Now, I'm digitizing in what we call the regular format of digitizing. If those of you don't know, if you go under Tools and General Options and under Digitizing, you have both a standard version and an advanced version of digitizing in both complex fill and satin stitching. In the standard version of the fill stitch, I've put in a default angle of 0. If I was in advanced, I would click on the area that I wanted to fill with stitches, but then it would ask me, what direction do you want those stitches? And I would put in a direction. Then it would ask me, where do you want your start point? Where do you want your end point? I would put those in, then it would generate the stitches. In standard, I've picked a default 0 angle. I just have to left click and right click. The software puts in the start and end points where it wants to, per se. I have no issue with that. That's okay. Why? Because, and I use standard a lot because it's so quick and easy, and the software has such an uncanny and a wonderful way to edit and move start and end points and change angles. So look at what I'm going to do. I want to add dimension to this structure. I'm going to select, and I'm actually going to select that box right there. I'm going to come to the third icon down and click on shape. And right off the bat, you see my start point green, my end point red. Here's my angle line. If I evaporate the stitches, and I can do that, you'll see the angle line more, okay? Well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to look at this angle here, right down on the bottom of this structure. I'm going to grab the angle line, and I'm going to pull till I'm that angle. Right-click, and that one's done. I'll turn the stitches back on. You'll see the stitches are now going that direction. This direction here, I'll just make a very simple movement there. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the stitches while I do this. I'll select this one now, this area, excuse me. Let me turn, I gotta have the stitches on in order to select. I'll select that. I'll come into shape again. I'm just going to change this angle slightly. I'm looking at this angle here. I didn't even need to go that much. Right click, it's done. Now once I select and I've hit shape, I'm in the right shape already. I'm going to look at this angle here now. Here's my angle line. I'm just going to pull that down slightly. I'm going to select this one here. There's my angle line. I'm looking at this line right here. I'm simply going to pull it to there. and right click. I've just added, now it looks like, because I'm going at like a 90 degrees, but to these angles, to the angles in the shape themselves. That way, you know what, if I were to use like a metallic thread in that and put that under the light, I'm going to get a different coloration. It's going to look different, even in the same color. I'm going to approach these same lighter areas in the same venue. Now, I don't have a light blue, but I'll go ahead and select a light blue. Oops, excuse me. Let me select my other color first. So we'll select this color, then I'm going to left click on that. I'm just going to change it to a lighter tone of blue. Right here will work. Click OK. Again, I've got my fill stitch, I've got my magic wand selected. Select the next color. Left click, right click, left, right, left click, right click, left click, right click. Okay? But then again, I'm going to come into select. I'll select this one first, go to the third icon down called shape. I'm going to change this angle here. I'm looking again down here. I don't have to be exact. I'm going to select this one now. Here's my angle line. I'm looking at this elongated angle up here. I'm going to change that angle line. Right click, it's done. I'm going to select this one. This one's fine, even going straight left to right 0, but I'm going to select this one. There's my angle line. Move that angle line. I'm looking at this angle up here. Right click. You know what? I've just added, I'll turn it on 3D. Okay, and you can already see, just that even in the 3D mode, I've created a whole nother dimension simply by changing my angles. My stitch type, the fill stitch, created that flat effect that I want on that diamond structure. That angle, those angles created the dimension. Okay, the only thing I have left to do is the satin stitch, so I'm going to select my satin stitch. My magic wand is still selected. I don't have black, I have purple. I'll left click on the purple, simply come up here, select black. Click OK. Now I've got black. Right click on that. Come anywhere in the black. Left click. Right click. The design is basically digitized now. It's not finished. We'll get back to that. Just bring it into 1-to-1. And I've created a beautiful little dimensional design. That's segmented auto digitizing. The segmenting allowed me to retain the integrity of this design, making it all fill stitching. The angles brought a great dimension into that embroidery design. Now, you use segmented auto digitizing specifically with your JPEGs, bitmaps, all of your backdrop files. But now let's talk about working with vector-based art. And I want to show you something that's really kind of cool that's been accomplished now. When you're working with vector-based art, and you know what, I do the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and select this. I'm going to come into transform. Well, this is a big design. Let's go into inches again. And into transform again. Already changed it. In width, this is about 5.1 inches. If I wanted it to be 5 or so, just backspace it to 5. Click apply, and now I'm sized correctly. Oops. I selected the wrong thing. I needed to select it all. Doesn't matter. 5.51, it's fine. But I always set the size initially. Now, the trouble, or not the trouble, but when you're digitizing, first of all, if we came back, and I'll bring up this diamond design again that I brought in after just to show you the sizing, you'll notice that when I bring in a JPEG or a bitmap, there's nothing over here in the sequence view. But when you're working with vector-based art, okay, and again, vector-based art is a piece of art that was brought in from a graphic program, Adobe Illustrator. This is an AI file. You look in the sequence view, and you already see a color in the sequence view. Well, those aren't stitches. If I open this up, you see artwork. It's vector-based digitizing. It was based on a drawing program, so it sees that vector-based art. Now, when you're working with vector-based art, you're not capable of using the magic wand. So if I come in here and let's say I measured this blue, well, if I measure this blue, certainly I'm going to use a fill stitch on there, all right? That's no big deal. I can tell just by looking at it I'm going to use a fill stitch. Well, I could grab the fill stitch, but look, I cannot grab the magic wand, all right? Why? Let me explain something. Now, there is almost magic wand digitizing because, look, quite honestly, I don't even have to pick a color down here. I can select that blue. You'll get a box around it. I can right-click and you'll say Convert To, and you'll convert to a complex fill. And it'll put it in a fill stitch. Now, that's virtually magic wand digitizing. But why don't we allow you to use the magic wand as opposed to utilizing that Convert To? Let me explain. When a lot of graphic artists create a graphics design on a graphic screen, they do a process that I call layering. You see the black outline that surrounds the entire design. Well, the issue with this, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off the blue color simply by clicking on the eyeball over here in the sequence view. See what's behind the blue, folks? Black. See, that's what layering is. They'll look at that entire background area on there, okay, and they'll simply put it in as they'll flood that entire area with color. Then they layer the colors on it. Okay, that's why you can't use the magic wand. Why? Because look, if I wanted to use the magic wand, I'd have no issue like here in the blue. It would fill that with blue. The issue would be in the black. So if I want to do that in a satin stitch, which certainly I'm going to want to do it to, I'd pick my satin stitch, I'd pick the magic wand, I'd click on it, but see, the software sees all that black. So in reality, probably going to lock the system up because we can't use it. I've never done it like that. But now, traditionally what I would have to do, because of that being layered like that, when I got to that black, I would have to more traditionally digitize. So I'd have to come in here, pick my black color, and I would have to do more of this sort of digitizing, very traditional digitizing. Like that, okay? But it was greatly simplified. And the last update that you got in the software, and I want you to watch this again. If I click on that blue, you see the black behind it. But watch what I'm going to do now, and I'll show you this twice if I need to. I'm going to select the black. I'm then going to hold down the control key, and I'm going to select the blue. So I've selected the black and that blue area. I'm going to right click, and you see where it says shaping here now? I'm going to say trim and click on trim. And watch now when I turn off that blue. The black is gone, okay? That's amazing. That was absolutely amazing update in the software. Why? Because now, if I wanted to do the whole thing, again, if I turned off like this yellow, I've got the black behind it. So now I'd have to click on the black, hold down the control key, click on the yellow, right click and say shaping, trim. Now I click on the yellow, the black's gone behind it. Now, unfortunately, and I don't know if they're going to be able to do this, I would like to see you be able to click on the black, hold down the shift key, and click all the colors and say trim. It doesn't function like this. So currently now I have to click on that black, click on the individual colors, right click, say shaping, and trim. But that's amazing because now I don't have to traditionally digitize that black. I can come in and select that black. I can select the satin stitch. I can right click and I can say convert to a satin stitch. That truly was a major update in working with vector-based art. It is magic wand digitizing, but you're selecting a piece of artwork and you're converting it to stitches. Now, those are really, for me, the two kind of very quick, very amplified levels of digitizing. But there is certainly an element of creation of embroidery designs where you're going to have to use more of a traditional form of digitizing. I'm going to run you through the running stitch, the satin stitch, and the fill stitches, the steel stitch and the fill stitch, in a more traditional manner of executing them. But you know what? This is moving away or really well. Kath, are you there? Okay, she's not again. She's. Are you, hon? Are there any questions? Okay. Okay, really nice updates. You know that ability with the vector-based art to change that really is amazing, and I just and also that defined scale. It's incredible. I mean, you know, with even the two softwares, the thing I want people with Suite to know is that Suite will never be abandoned. In fact, folks, I can't even tell you, but wait till you see your next update in Suite. To me, it's a major one. I'm very excited, but I'm just gonna titillate you a little bit like that and let you wonder what the heck you're going to get. But it is very cool, and it's coming quickly. In fact, I think the next webinar, I don't care what it's called, I'm probably going to take the whole time just telling you about the most current update. Okay, we're going to go ahead through more traditional execution of the stitch types, and I've brought up a graphic here. And what I mean traditional execution is, again, magic wand, convert to, is auto-digitizing, but a piece at a time. But, and we're going to start right now with the manual stitch. For the finest of detail in an embroidery design, we utilize a manual stitch. Manual stitches I also utilize in stitch editing and I've done a webinar on this before, tying in your small lettering in between the letters where you step in between the letters. You're laying a manual stitch, okay? But this is a technique for doing the most minute of embroidery. It's a lesson that I teach in my book, Destined to Digitize. My opinion is that once you learn the technique, you see running stitches, in this case, first of all, a manual stitch is up here in your stitch selection right here. When you select manual stitch, what manual stitch actually means is one stitch at a time digitizing. Every place that I left click, so I'm going to left click there, I'm going to come out here and left click, then I'm going to come right here and left click, left click, left click. Now if I generate the needle penetration points, my stitch ends, you'll see I have a stitch here, a stitch here, stitch here, stitch here, stitch here. Every place that I left click drops a stitch. Now, let me be clear. In this exercise, or what I'm going to show you right here, is a manual stitch, but I'm going to be actually executing running stitches, okay? This structure would be like a running stitch, but realize, in a manual stitch, I can also execute a satin stitch. There's nothing to it. I can also execute a fill stitch. So a manual stitch is really just defined, in my opinion, as one stitch at a time digitizing. It's as old as embroidery itself. In fact, my favorite thing about this one lesson is once you do this one lesson out of my workbook, Destined to Digitize, you've taken a step back more than 100 years in the embroidery process to the inception of mechanized embroidery. It's one stitch at a time digitizing. Anyway, these letters, when you're done executing them in the workbook, yields 3mm tall lettering with perfect clarity, okay? Perfect clarity. Now, in order to do that, we have to follow the rules of a running stitch. The rules of a running stitch very quickly are simply length equals loft. The stitch length has to be, and if this is 3mm tall lettering, these little red marks I call tick marks. If I drop a stitch here, drop a stitch here, drop a stitch here, the length of the stitch is about 1.5 millimeters. It is 1.5 millimeters. Okay, length equals loft. The shortest you want to lay a running stitch to show is about 1 millimeter. Want it to hide, you lay it shorter than that, 2 to 3/10. Okay, it's not really what this lesson is about, but I want to show you because number one, it has to be done with a running stitch. But it also has to be executed the same amount of times. What I mean by that, in order to bring clarity to this lettering, every letter in this word here, measurement per se, and I'm just going to do the word measure. I'll stop right here at the E, has to be done with a double run stitch. Every letter has to be done twice and only twice. Now, look, if I started here in the M, all right, and I picked my manual stitch, and let's go ahead and apply a color to it. Let's go ahead and make it look 3D. If I click the stitch right here, 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 I'm going to click here, here, and here, and here. That'd be once. Then I'd click back here. That's twice. That'd be 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 twice. And that's twice. That letter'd be done perfectly twice. Now, I want to travel in between the M to the E right here. Well, look, if I come into the E here, here's the issue. I can come up, that'd be once, that'd be once, that'd be once, that'd be twice, that'd be twice, once, twice, twice, but then look, once, twice, 3 times. You see, thread has weight, measurable weight. If I came into the A, it'd be the same thing. I'd come over to here once, come back twice. Oops, now I got to go a 3rd time. I don't have continuity to the amount of times that I travel through it. Look, this is probably going to be the least, or the stitch you use the least, but I'm going to show you how you execute minute detail, because everything has to be pathed twice and only twice. I'm going to start here on the bottom left of the M. I'm going to left click here, going to 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 click here. That's 1 time. But then I'm going to take 2 to 3 tiny little stitches. The length of these stitches is 2 to 3/10 of a millimeter. They drive down into the fabric. You will not see them. I'm going to step across the bottom of the letter E. Then 2 to 3 little tiny stitches into the A. I'm right there. Then I'm going to start here in the A, and I'm going to step up, go all the way through the A to the far right side, 2 to 3 little tiny stitches into my S. Then I'm here in the S. I'm going to drop a stitch here, going to drop a stitch here, 2 to 3 little tiny stitches into the U. I'm right here, I'm going to come right here, going to come right here, going to come right here, 2 to 3 little tiny stitches into the R, going to step here in the R, down in the R, 2 to 3 little tiny stitches into the E. What I've just done is I've laid a continuous filament of thread from the first letter to the last letter. I'm right here in the E. So watch, now it's so easy. I'm just going to do measure. That's once, that's once, that's once, come back, that's twice, come out here once, that's twice, come down here, that's twice, that's once, that's twice. The E is done perfectly twice. 2 to 3 little more stitches back into the R. That's twice on that bar, that's once, that's once, that's once, that's once, that's once, that's twice, 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 perfectly twice. 2 to 3 stitches back into the U. That's once, that's twice, 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 come up, that's once, that's twice, The U is perfectly twice. 2 to 3 stitches back into the S. That's once, that's once, that's once, that's once. Come back, that's twice, that's twice, that's twice, that's twice, that's twice, that's twice, perfectly twice. 2 to 3 back into the A. That's twice, that's twice, that's twice, come across the crossbar, that's once, that's twice, 2 to 3 back into the E, that's twice, that's once, that's once, that's once, that's twice, once, twice, the E is perfectly twice. 2 to 3 stitches back into the M, that's twice, 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 perfectly twice. The rules to minute work, done with a running stitch, a manual stitch, stitch length. The next rule then is spacing. 2 bars that go in the same direction, like an M next to an E, an I next to an I. You need 8 to 10 millimeters spacing in between. The third rule is opening size. In order to keep the A open, the R open, I need 8 tenths to 1 millimeter spacing to open it. Same thing in the R. And then the final rule is everything a double run. Now, how do I suggest you learn this? Well, certainly you can do my lesson in the book, but if you want to do minute lettering or minute structures, again, print out your artwork with one color. Again, what I try to do is I try to create a continuous filament of thread from the beginning structure to the end of the structure. I do that in one color with a colored pencil. Then as you path back, use a second colored pencil. You'll be amazed how quickly you can adapt to this. Again, you've taken a step back over 100 years in embroidery creation in this. You don't do this. And I mean, that's why like in our keyboard lettering, we have now the central run lettering, which isn't actually in the other software, but we are adapting some running stitch lettering. Currently with Sweet, you have to execute it like this. Literally path out with one color, path back with another color. You'll be amazed really at how well you'll do. Okay, we're going to move over to the running stitch. Now, I just executed that with a running stitch, but the differential is if I come up here and I click on a running stitch, first of all, when I'm in the manual stitch, you'll see in the properties box, all you have is a color selection in your commands. But the minute I click on a run stitch, I get stitch length, stitch type, and then the pattern. Well, look, again, length equals loft. Most running stitches, when I want them really to show, I throw them at about 3 millimeters. Now, when I'm working with, again, a manual stitch, every place I left click, it's dropping the stitch. But you see, when I'm working with a running stitch, I can click here, and I can click down here. Let me turn it off 3D for a second and do the stitch ends, the needle penetration points. But because I've set a stitch length, every 3 millimeters, that stitch is dropping. So running stitch, basically same stitch as I used in that manual stitch, but now I've preset a stitch length. I do not have to follow, or I do not have to worry about where I'm left clicking. Every stitch along that line is going to be 3 millimeters. So let's go ahead and execute this structure right here. Now, in Floriani software, when you want to make a curve, I'm going to click here. Now, if I came up here, you'll see that I have a straight. But if I hold down the control key makes curves. And I can move along here. I can throw them at random lengths. It doesn't really matter. And it'll actually follow that curve. And I could just walk right along like this, just all left clicks. To finish a segment, manual stitching, run stitching, all stitching in Floriani, you left click to execute, you right click to end the segment and generate the stitches. So I'm just following this line. Now, again, you see my blue points. They're not all at the same stitch length, but right click, They're all set at 3mm stitch length. Now let's go ahead and make it look 3D. Now the neat thing with the running stitch though, and I'll go ahead and select it, is you do have types. Standard, that is a single run stitch. So the design would start here, come out to the end, it's going to end right here. 2-ply would be a double run, so I could select 2-ply and apply. It's going to now start here, it's going to walk out, then it's going to walk back. That's a double run. I can set a bean stitch and click apply. A bean stitch is a 3-time run stitch. It would move forward, back, forward, forward, back, forward, forward, back, forward, forward, back, forward. Okay? But get this, you can also apply your motifs. You have a wonderful selection of motifs. You can select a motif and apply it to that structure. You can also select any one of the symbols. And your symbols, certainly you'll see up here, excuse me, my symbols are right. Where are my symbols now? Here's actual pictures of the symbols that you have, but you'll also get a list right here. Now when you see this list, you could click on this right here and you'll see them also. But if I wanted to apply anchors to that running stitch line, I don't know why I'd want to, but anchors away. I can apply the symbols to that running stitch line too. I really love that about the running stitch. You have single, double, triple, the ability to utilize your motifs and also utilize your symbols in there. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next stitch. Satin stitch. Now, I've got a structure here and I'll show you it, but there are basically 3 different types of satins. 2 more traditional and then a steel stitch. But the first one that I'm going to show you is what's simply called an input satin path. All right, I'm going to select the input satin path. Now, I'll explain the other one, but I'm selecting input satin path. I'm going to come down here, just right click on another color. I'll do this structure, but I've simply made a letter I initially because it's a little easier to understand with just a simple letter I. To create an input satin path, I'm going to left click at the top left of the letter I. I'm going to come down to the bottom left of the letter I, and I'm going to left click again. But then I'm going to transcend over to the other side. So now I'm going to right click, and I'm going to come over to the bottom right of the letter I, and I'm going to left click there. I'm coming up to the top right of the letter I. I'm going to left click there. And then when I right click, boom, it generates a beautiful satin stitch. All right. Now, if I wanted to create this structure, I want the stitches to go up and down. I would left click here. I would left click. So I've left clicked bottom left click bottom right. Now I'm going to right click and go to the top right. And I'm going to left click. Then with a series of left clicks, I'm going to define the shape. Now, once again, I'm coming into curve so I can hold down my control key. I'm releasing now because I'm doing a straight. I'm then coming back into my curves. All left clicks, release. I'm doing a straight. I lay the first one straight, then I hold down the control key. Come in, release, another left click. So I defined left click, right click to get to this side. Then with a series of left clicks, I've defined this whole side till I get to this end, left click, then right click, and it generates the stitches. Now, that's the input satin path. When the software was first developed, that was the form of the satin stitching that came with the software. But in redeveloping the software, I added what's called a classic satin. Let me explain. If you came or if you come and still digitize and have my software now, from my era of digitizing, classic satin is what we call point counterpoint. So example, you know what? I'll just use this letter I. Let me select that. Let me right click and delete it. All right. If I want to do this letter I in the classic satin, I'm going to click on it. But now I'm going to left click on the top left. I'm going to left click on the top right. Then I'm going to come to the bottom left click, bottom right, left click, then generate. See, that's called point counterpoint. I go point, counterpoint, point, counterpoint. So if I wanted to do this letter S, I would do it like this. Point, come out here, counterpoint, point, counterpoint, point, counterpoint, point, counterpoint. Then right click and it'll generate the stitches. Now, the reason that we do that, or that I created that, number one, there was a comfort zone. for me when I created like that. But also, let me explain something. Those of you who've seen me at a class, I talk about why we bird nest, and I teach a process that I call angle in and angle out. I'll go ahead and make a letter L. I'm going to left click. That's point, because I can do it from inside to outside. It doesn't matter. I'm going to left click right here, and then I'm going to come into the corner of my letter L, but now I'm angling. And then as I come into the corner of the letter L, okay, I did make a real pretty L, but I'm trying to move along here, okay? What I do is as I'm entering the corner of the letter L, the angle I approach the corner at is basically the same angle I come into the corner, meaning the angle coming in is the same angle as the corner. I come out at the same angle, okay? What that is, it's a softening technique. Let me take it off 3D. Okay, the challenge that we initially had with the satin stitch, the input satin path, is that when it used to create a letter L, I'll go ahead and get rid of that, it used to do this. All I have to do, this is right here. Okay, the problem with digitizing like this, folks, is right here in the corner. Because I came from a straight angle into a corner, you know what? I have a much easier way of showing this. You'll just give me a second. I don't know why I'm not relying on my designs that I have in the system, but I'll bring this up. This is the way that the input satin path used to do an angle. Okay? And what a digitizer did here, he or she, and I'll go ahead and select this and mark the angles. Okay? Just in shape. You see it, I'll go ahead and evaporate the stitches. They came from a straight angle into a curve into a straight. This is what actually causes bird nesting on knit materials, all right? Why? Because you actually have the same amount of stitching from here to here as you have from here to here. As I generate the stitches, you'll see it, okay? When you look at this one, it's a process of coming into the angle at the same angle of the corner and coming out at the same angle of the corner, all right? Now, that's a benefit to this process. Why is that a benefit? Because it de-stresses the corner. See how it's angling in and coming out at the same angle? It's a softening technique that we use in embroidery creation. Now, look, it's pretty, the software is amazing, because if you ever see a corner like this, I'll just show you how I correct it. I'll always select, because I always look at how a design I didn't create, like a stock design, how it corners. Because realize, not only do you have an amazing digitizing system, you have an amazingly advanced editing system. The strongest thing about the software, in my opinion, when you import something into it, it thinks it digitized it. This is like a stock design. I select it, I go to shape. See how I have the straight, the angle, and the straight? I'll get rid of the stitches, the straight, the angle, and the straight. Watch what I can do. I grab this angle and I pull it down. I grab this angle and simply pull it over. I'm looking at the angle of the corner. So there you see the straight, the angle, and the straight. I move two angle lines, right click, left click. You'll never bird nest again, number one, in the embroidery process. Also, you're following the rules to proper digitizing, angling in and angling out. Now, all that to basically say this. The issue with, again, the input satin path was it used to do these hard angles. But we changed the logic on how it angles or it corners, okay, to something that we simply call fractional spacing. That means when the input satin path now wants to do a corner, it's trying to maintain the same distance inside as it has outside. What that does is it forces the angle in and the angle out very, very naturally. And it's a perfect way to turn. Now, all of that to tell you this, excuse me, let me just bring up, where are you? Oops, it's design one, okay? The challenge with utilizing the classic satin is that when you're using the classic satin, you are the angles, okay? Now, I've been digitizing all my life. I understand angles, but this is what happens to a lot of people just getting started digitizing. They don't fully understand angles. It takes a long time to learn the angles. So this is what kind of happens. You'll be doing short angles and wide angles, and your design's just not going to run that well per se, okay? But let me show you what happened when we changed the logic on the input satin path. Let me go ahead and just undo some of this stuff. okay, to do this letter S now, because if you, again, come from my error, use the classic satin. If you're just getting started, I really suggest you use the input satin path, because watch what I'm going to do. I pick input satin path. I come here and left click. I'm going to now define the entire inside, or the entire side of the letter S, okay? I'm holding down the control key again because I'm doing curves. I release because I have a straight now. I take another little straight step and go right back into my curves. I'm just going to do this kind of quick. I don't have to be that defined. All left clicks down this whole one side. I've completed that with all lefts. Right click to get to the other side. Then I start again holding down the control key because I'm in a curve. Even though I've fully trained with that classic satin, 99% of the time now I'm using my input satin path. Why? Because since we changed the logic on how it goes around a corner with this fractional spacing thought process, you don't even have to think about the angles. See, with the classic satin, you've always got to think about angles. Now I'm just going to right click, but look at this letter S. My gosh, folks, those are beautiful angles in that letter S. I absolutely love the input satin path. Now, I'm going to move on to the steel stitch. A steel stitch is another form of a satin stitch, but you actually utilize this, because let me go ahead and show you. I'll execute it. I'm going to click on the steel stitch. You input it like a running stitch. So I'm going to just go right down the center of this line. Because I'm doing a curve, I'm just going to left click along here. I'm not even going to do the whole structure. But once I'm done, we'll just come right to here. I'm staying right in the center. I right click, boom, satin stitch. Now, great thing about an input satin path, and I can select it, you can come in here and vary the width. That looks like about 1.4, 1.5 to me. I'll set it to 1.5. I can apply it, boom. Input, or excuse me, a steel stitch is for a balanced width satin stitch. Where could I utilize something like that? Look, I'm going to take the time and just show you real quick where I utilize it. Let's load backdrop. I'm in the wrong area of my computer. That's okay. A design like this. You bring up this basketball design. Okay, grab this one, move it over. Well, the issue with this basketball design, as I zoom into it, look, if I came in and measured, the orange is going to be fill stitches, the black is going to be satin. But you see what I have here? Very narrow satin stitches, very wide satin stitches. Now, this is a JPEG. I could easily come in here and I could click my input satin path. I could click my magic wand, click it. It'll make that all satin. But you know what I'm incurring now? I'm incurring probably an hour or two of editing because I got to make these very narrow lines the same width as these lines. Or I could actually come in here and just run a running stitch through here in the steel stitch, set it to the width that satin stitch is, it'll make it perfectly. But then I could do a running stitch around the entire outside and do it easily as well. Or you know what else you could do in a case like this? You can come in, you could measure the height of that basketball design. That's 38.9 millimeters, let's say. You do have your artwork tool in the software. You could hit an ellipse. You can come in and by hitting the shift key, you'll make, or excuse me, the control key, you'll make a perfect circle. I'll just guesstimate right now. I'm going to select it and we'll move it in. Oops, excuse me. I'm going to select it. I'm going to come in, excuse me. First of all, I'm going to measure the height of it. Well, that's pretty close. So let's just say 39.2. But you know what I can do now? Because I created a piece of artwork, so I don't even have to put a running stitch line. I can right click on that now, and I can say convert that to a steel stitch. Convert that to a steel. Again, let's make that, I call that about 1.8 by looking at that other width. Apply it. Now, once it's applied, I can come in after it's selected, and I can move it right into position over that. And boom, I've got a perfect satin stitch border there. I've eliminated all my editing. I can then continue the rest with just the steel stitch. Learning a little bit about traditional stitch input and then utilizing even your artwork tool, then right-clicking and selecting, I just saved myself a couple of hours of editing, okay? Let's go ahead and move on. Next thing I want to show you is your fill stitch. Fill stitch certainly is the easiest stitch. Again, I'm in the general mode or in the standard mode, so I just pick my fill stitch, come down here, and let's just select another color. All I'm going to do is left click here, left click here, left click here, left click here, left here, left here, left here, 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 left click here, here. Now I don't need to left click at the starting point. It sees that straight line. Right click generates the stitches. Want to change the angle if you're in standard, just select it, come down to reshape. You can change an angle that quickly. Want to move your start point, it's always green, put it where you want. Want to move an end point, put it where you want. Right click, boom, it's done. It's so manipulative in editing that I love that. Again, I love the simplicity and the speed of the standard stitch. I'll go ahead and I just tend to use it. I change my angles, move start point, end points. Now, I just want to cover one more thing, and then I have a couple of other things to say. A complex fill with holes. These are really cool. Again, I'm in my complex fill. Let me just grab another color. I'm simply going to left click here, to define the shape. Left click, left click. Now, I don't need to get this last one, but if I right click, it's going to fill the whole thing. If you want a hole in the software, just click H. H is for holes. I can left click now, I can left click, I can left click, I can left click, I can left click here, I can left click here, left click here, left click here, left click here, left click here. I don't have to left click up here. It'll see that straight line. I want another hole, so don't right click, hit H for another hole. Left click, hold down your control key because you're doing a curve. Just simply left click around it. Again, I'm going kind of fast, so I'm not being precise. I would zoom in much more. I don't have to finish it. Right click, boom. Fill stitch with holes. Want to auto border it? Select it. Right click on it. Say create a border. Puts a border in, but you know what? That border is a run stitch. But you know what? I'll always select it. I'll probably change the color on it first. It's still selected. I can right click and I can say convert that to a steel stitch. It'll put it in as a steel stitch. It'll also border internally. Okay, but I can come in and say I actually wanted that border to be 1.4. Excuse me. I got a piece of paper over my computer. 1.4. Apply it. So you can auto border with it also. Look, that's a little bit about the traditional stitching, about your layering or what order. But now, a couple of other things that I want to cover. I actually want to go back to this design that I created, because while this design is digitized, this design indeed is not done. So the next step when you're working within Floriani software, and I'll go ahead and get rid of the 3D look. Again, I'm going to get rid of the graphic. Is that there's no overlap. Embroidery, I've taught it. I've always taught it. I know that most of you know it, is an art form of distortion. But the distortion values are all worked out for you. So you hit File, certainly Save to Sew. Pick your material types. Because we use the magic wand, you'll always select magic wand. So let's say fleece magic wand. Next, going to put in the proper density, proper underlay, proper pull comp. That's your overlap that needs to take place. It's an art form of distortion. Apply and yes. But then, very, very important, when you hit next, it tells you your stabilizer. Folks, if you're not using the software, this element in the software, this takes all the guesswork out. We've tested 65 different material types to determine the proper stabilization, proper distortion values, densities, underlay. It's important. Print that out. It's your guideline. Hit finish. That design is going to run perfectly on that piece of fleece now. All right? That's your ending thing that you do. But now, once you've done all that and you've got the right stabilizers and such, folks, look, one other thing. Sew out your design. Never assume. I mean, the software is amazing, but always sew out your design on the material type that you're going to run it on. The importance of that is that materials react different to the embroidery stitch. We've worked out those densities, those underlays, but you always want to get a good finished sample, and that's really the final step of digitizing. Always run your sample. But most people, when they run samples, they run on twills, on canvas. Folks, you might as well be stitching on a piece of wood. If you're digitizing or creating a design for a minky or a piece of fleece, run it on that given material. And then after you're done running, you know what? When you go into production, always use one of my pressing cloth and press your embroideries with a little steam. It'll puff up that thread. It sets the thread. It's just like being a seamstress. It'll always launder better. Press it again when it comes out of the washer. It'll go back to its original shape. I have run us overtime already. I'd like to thank you all for coming. Kathy, I don't even have time for any questions as they come in. The entire staff, I love you all. Thanks for all your help behind the scenes. Folks of you listening, there's a bunch of us online right now answering your questions and taking care of stuff technically. Thank you, my Floriani support team. You guys are the best that I've ever seen in this industry. Kathy, as always, you're magnificent. I love you all, my clients. You're all the best, and I hope you've enjoyed this. Hugs and stitches to you all.